Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jen Benson, and I serve as the president of ABL, the Alliance for Business Leadership. On behalf of the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce and ABL, welcome to today's event on offshore wind. ABL is a coalition of CEOs, entrepreneurs, investors, and business leaders who believe that the best way to grow the Massachusetts economy is through public policy that is sustainable, equitable, and socially responsible. As we kick off this event, I want to thank our sponsor, the Bar Foundation. It is through their generosity that we are able to bring these insightful conversations to you. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Tim Murray, former Lieutenant Governor and current President and CEO of the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce. Thanks, Tim.
Well, thank you, Jen, for that introduction, as well as the opportunity to moderate this discussion and the opportunity for the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce to partner with the Alliance for Business Leadership on an extremely important topic with members of our chamber and the broader community, as well as others. So we want to get right into this so that we can have a chance to have a substantive conversation with our panelists, but also open up time for Q&A as well. So it's my pleasure to introduce today's panelists, and we're going to just names and titles so we can jump right in. Bruce Carlisle is the Managing Director of Offshore Wind at the Mass Clean Energy Center. Judy Sylvia is the Senior Director of Public Affairs at Mass MEP, Mass Manufacturing Extension Partnership. And Jennifer Cullen is the Manager of Workforce and Supply Chain Development at Vineyard Wind. And Tim Harvey is the Project Executive at Manafort Precision. So with that, I'm going to jump right in with a question for Bruce Carlisle. You know, we've been hearing about the huge economic impact and potential of offshore wind for this decade and others to come. Now that construction has started with Vineyard Wind, where do we stand now in terms of the economic activity and job growth, and how much of an opportunity has been concentrated on the coast, and where are those opportunities inland?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tim. And thanks also to ABL, Worcester Chamber, for sponsoring this forum, this panel this morning. Really great to be here. Very quickly, the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, we are focused on the responsible development of offshore wind, reducing risks, increasing market confidence, supporting the economic development and workforce opportunities. We work with industry, we work with government, we work with academia and others as we all continue our journey on offshore wind. I think you'll hear this theme here is we've really, the industry in the US has hit a turning point. And I think a lot of that credit can fall on the Biden administration, who after years of delay from our prior administration, has taken very swift action in favor of the industry, including the final federal approvals for Vineyard Wind, and Jen Cullen's here, and she can tell you more about that. But with Vineyard Wind's permitting and their financial close, we really do have a project that is teed up in line after years and years and years and years of hard work. So let me just talk quickly about the opportunities, and then Tim, there was some other things in there which I can try to unpack and also pick up as we continue this conversation. The opportunity is not to understate it really, or overstate it was what I meant, I think, but it's massive. So our colleagues at the Special Initiative of Offshore Wind and their consultant team released a report in 2018 and just updated it with an eye towards the Biden administration's 30 gigawatts by 2030 goal. And they looked at what the CapEx, DevEx, which is sort of development spending, and OpEx, operating of the wind farms expenditures would be for that. Well, it's 32 gigawatts. That number is $109 billion in economic activity, and that's a very conservative number. In Massachusetts, Mass CEC commissioned a study back in 2018 looking at, especially focused on workforce, but also looked at supply chain and economic impacts. And looking at just the first 1,600 megawatts, which would be equivalent to the Vineyard Wind Project, which is the first procurement done by Massachusetts, and the Mayflower Wind Project, which was selected during the second procurement. We're looking at $600 to $800 million in direct economic impact, and about $1.5 to $2 billion in total economic impact. In terms of jobs, we're looking on the order of 2,000 to 3,000 direct job years, and something on the order of 7 to 10 total job years. And then the operation and maintenance, these are the long-term 25 to 30-year positions for the wind farms to make sure that they are operating as designed. We're looking at on the order of 150 to 250 direct annual job years. And again, I could go on, but I'll turn it back to you, Tim, and we'll pick up some of those themes as we continue.
Well, thank you, Bruce. Some big numbers there, and a lot of jobs. Speaking of jobs, Tim Harvey from Manafort Construction, a Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce business, has done a lot of work here locally. I think most recently, many of our panelists and viewers may be familiar with the Polar Park project, but Manafort's done a number of jobs here locally. But we see you as a real offshore wind success story. And maybe you could talk a little bit about the work that Manafort has done on the project and how the company got involved in the offshore supply chain. Tim, you're on. You got on mute.
Thank you, Tim, and the Worcester Chamber of Commerce for inviting us today. We have had a lot of success together, especially locally, like you mentioned, at Polar Park. And we first got involved into the wind industry because we're generally excited about the potential of delivering this new technology that's going to provide so much utility to the area. And we got involved in the New Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal, which happens to be at the time it was built, the highest load-bearing port in the nation. It was a 1,200-foot long bulkhead, which was designed to support the deployment of offshore wind projects. And at the time, it was really, I would say, more at the beginning of the process of bringing offshore wind to the United States. And even now, five years later, I still feel like we're at the very beginning of it all. I was reading that there's about 109 billion in the supply chain over the next 10 years. That's for the Northeast region. It's going to provide significant statewide jobs and local jobs for the men and women that work for us every day. We have a large all-union workforce that's highly skilled, highly trained. This type of work requires special materials, special coatings, a lot of care to the engineering that went into it. They're very large components, and you need a highly skilled, trained workforce to perform this work. And it's not just our own workers that will be incredibly happy to be employed on these projects. We also have a whole supply chain. These projects take materials, vehicles, equipment, and these are all things that we procure locally with people that we've had relationships in this area for years. So we're incredibly excited about this new technology and this utility that's going to be coming to the area. And the Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal is just the beginning of what we hope to be a part of, and we'd be humbled to be a part of the rest of this story.
Tim, just in that regard, I don't know if you had any approximate number in terms of operations and the hiring, the number of jobs during that period of time that you were working in New Bedford.
We had about 50 people going for, I would say, about 6 months on that project. So it was a significant project for us. I think looking at the estimates of the overall scope of offshore wind coming here to the United States, between all the work onshore and offshore, you'd have a significant impact well beyond what was down in New Bedford, and that itself was a very large project. So we're very, very excited, and we'd love to be a part of helping out the local economy in any way we can.
well, given the proximity to the facility that the Manafort Precision team worked on in downtown New Bedford, I'm sure the restaurants and other venues that down in the historic district near the New Bedford Whaling Museum appreciated that activity. With that, I'll go to Jennifer Cullen. Can you walk us through Vineyard Wind's supply chain outreach efforts and what kind of industries that you're engaging with?
Thanks, Tim, and thanks to everyone for hosting us today. So Vineyard Wind has officially locked up all of its contracts for construction of our first wind farm. And the way that we and other developers procure these projects is through doing large kind of lumped together contracts for each of the packages of the wind farm. So the way that looks is that we have a package for the wind turbine procurement. We have a package for foundations and installation. We have a package for the cables. So across the full construction of the project, we have 7 packages. And so given the early days of the supply chain and the industry here in the US, most of the components unique to offshore wind, the turbines, the foundations, most of the big vessels that are needed for the installation of the project necessarily have to come from Europe. We just don't have them here in the US at this point. We are hopeful that given what Bruce was discussing and the big commitments that have been made both by the states and the federal government to advance this industry, that signals that's a good investment signal to the international community to really invest in the vessels needed and the manufacturing facilities here in the US for offshore wind. But we don't have it yet, and we don't have it for the first project. That said, within each of those packages, there is a lot more than just the major components. It's not just turbines and vessels and foundations. There's a lot that can be sourced locally. And Vineyard Wind has a commitment through its first project called Look Local First. And that requires all of our suppliers to offer Massachusetts businesses the opportunity to bid in on any open scopes and any open RFPs that our contractors will have within their contracts. We've been working really closely with Bruce and the Clean Energy Center on figuring out exactly how to help support our contractors to look local first. And I know Judy and her group, the Mass MEP, is a part of another initiative called the New Bedford Ocean Cluster. And I'm sure she'll speak to that, so I won't jump in too much on that, but that's another partnership we're working on. By looking local first with our contractors, we really do now have a shared goal with the global offshore wind community to identify businesses within the US and bring them into the supply chain. There are a lot of existing businesses that we have here in the state of Massachusetts and especially across the US that provide components and resources that the industry needs. And so identifying what those opportunities are is the first step. And Mass Clean Energy Center has been working hard on that for a very long time through their supply chain directory. And then working with our contractors to identify where the opportunities are to bring those companies into the supply chain. And so we had our first Meet the Buyer event last week, actually. So one of our major contractors, Demi Offshore US, who is in charge of the package we call transportation and installation. They will transport and install both our foundations and our turbines. So they actually have 2 major contracts with Vineyard Wind. We had an event with them last week. It was 2 parts. So Mass CEC helped to support us matchmaking them with local businesses that fill service needs that they identified as priority. Everything from, like you had mentioned, really local businesses in New Bedford that provide certain services. There were other vessel providers and some kind of smaller component providers within the state. They actually held 50 meetings with local businesses within Massachusetts, which is fantastic. And the initial feedback they gave us was, yeah, these businesses absolutely provide things that we need. And we're looking forward to building the relationship and hopefully working with them. The second part of that event that we held with Demi was with the New Bedford Ocean Cluster to bring in the very local businesses in New Bedford and introduce this major global contractor to what we have in New Bedford. And that's kind of what, Tim, you had mentioned, the restaurants, the hotels, the local hardware providers, PPE. These contractors need all of those things. They're going to have a very strong presence in southeastern Massachusetts, and we want them to buy local wherever they can. And the first step in that is just introducing them to the businesses that can provide those services. So that's a little bit about, how we see the opportunity to support and cultivate the supply chain, even in the very early days of the industry, as we are still working to establish local manufacturing and some of the big providers. We are, the first step is understanding what we currently have that the industry needs and helping to support and facilitate those introductions and contracts eventually.
So Jennifer, just you mentioned in a very detailed way, the focus locally in New Bedford, and as well as some of the programs across the state or incentives to engage with companies across the state. If there are somebody who's watching who maybe hasn't participated in any of those things you just described, how could they reach out now and plug in to learn where there may be current or future opportunities?
I mean, the first thing I would recommend is making sure that they're on the CEC supply chain database, because we're working with CEC, and I know other developers are also going to be utilizing the same database. So having that comprehensive resource of what's available in the state is the first step. Vineyard Wind is also, we have on our website for contractors interested in working for us. We're also collecting information. And so I'd encourage people to submit their information there. And then if they are local to New Bedford in the South Coast, the New Bedford Ocean Cluster is not just going to be collecting information from those businesses, but really helping to educate and support the local businesses in that region to ensure that they're qualified and eligible to bid into certain scopes that we will need. So those are kind of three resources I would really direct people to right off the bat.
Thanks, Jennifer. Judy, just, for those of us in Central Mass and given the strong manufacturing cluster that we continue to have in Central Massachusetts, many of us are familiar with the great work that Mass MEP, the Mass Manufacturing Extension Partnership, does. But just before we get into specifically some of the work around offshore wind and opportunities, maybe you could just share with everyone what Mass MEP does on a daily basis across the Commonwealth.
Sure. Thank you, Tim, and the Worcester Chamber and ABL for having us here today. We very much appreciate it. And yet, so we are very uniquely positioned to help the manufacturers be part of this supply chain, because we are boots on the ground every day. We have a team that goes out there and helps our small and medium sized manufacturers become more efficient with their processes. So we help them with things like, lean manufacturing and value stream mapping. We help them with their workforce development issues and helping them attract and retain employees. And we're also assisting them with innovative growth strategies. So the new digital world that's in front of us in things like robotics, 3D printing, and those areas, the digital world. So we're helping them basically grow in Massachusetts. And we began thinking about this, the potential opportunities in offshore wind, over a year ago. We've been working with Mass CEC on the supply chain. So we've helped them in that regard and done a high level overview of the manufacturing capacity out there. And we continue to work with them today. We also, reached out to Jennifer at Vineyard Wind to let them know that we're here and we're a resource for them as far as reaching out to the manufacturing community. And Jennifer mentioned the New Bedford Ocean Cluster. They introduced us to that group, and we're very appreciative of that. And we are what you call a community lead for the manufacturing community. So we'll be working with the manufacturers as far as, are they prepared to participate in the RFPs and these packages that Jennifer mentioned. There's so many things that potentially our manufacturers could participate in. It's all the other things you don't think of, things like, canvases, lighting, diesel generators, fasteners, machine horns, food. There are just so many other things that are components of this. So we'll be working with the New Bedford OSIN cluster, and again, looking at areas that potentially our manufacturers could participate in these RFPs. And one thing that we want our manufacturers to know that we're there for them, advocating and looking out for them during this process, because we'll learn a lot through this exercise with Vineyard Wind as far as our manufacturers' capabilities. Do they need help in pivoting? What's the cost involved? So it's going to be a learning process as well. And again, I think it's very important that our manufacturers, the small and medium size, are able to participate in this offshore wind industry.
Yeah, that's right, Judy. Given what Bruce described at the outset, and as other contracts are let out and procurement takes place, these are opportunities even beyond Massachusetts shores. Bruce, I'm gonna come back to you. Clearly there's an important conversation taking place in the Commonwealth and around the country about what we can do in terms of addressing equity and providing workforce and supply chain opportunities for minority-owned businesses and communities that were largely left out of the solar energy boom of the 2000s. Maybe you could kind of talk a little bit about Mass CEC approach, and then also, if there are other panelists that want to jump in on some of their thoughts and efforts in that regard.
Yeah, Tim, thanks. I think that this is a very, very important issue, and one, the team at Mass CEC and our leadership, and I know which extends beyond Mass CEC into the Baker administration, certainly has placed a premium on as we launch this industry, ensuring that the opportunities are equitable, that our workforce and supply chain is diverse, and that the entire enterprise is just. A few things on that, I guess number one, it might be worth just sort of reminding everyone in the audience, we've been sort of focused a lot in today's conversation on sort of the manufacturing and the wind turbine generators and those components. Yes, that capital equipment, that infrastructure drives a significant amount of both supply chain and workforce activity. But it's really important to remind folks that there are other sort of phases, in that in what they call the planning and development phase, there are also lots and lots and lots of opportunities. And this is an area where Massachusetts is really, really strong. Engineering, material testing, remote sensing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we need attorneys, financial operations, all of that. So I just want to remind people that when they think of offshore wind, people think about these, beautiful turbines out in the water. A lot of scope goes into that. So that's just sort of a helpful reminder. But getting back to diversity, equity, inclusion, a few things, and I think one other quick point is that we often sort of talk about supply chain, but it's really hard to sort of split supply chain and workforce, right? This is the physical capital and the human capital all coming together for this enterprise. A couple things. Ensuring access to opportunity in offshore wind as we build this from the ground up has been a priority. And we've run a couple workforce grant opportunities. We've done our first in partnership with Vineyard and our second round, both with Vineyard and Mayflower. And in those opportunities, we asked people to give us their best thoughts about sort of equity, inclusion, environmental justice. And there was a lot of focus on the workforce training programs, but not as much focus on some of those equity issues. So we made a conscious decision in our last opportunity to focus exclusively on access to opportunity and really reaching out into the state, finding the community organizations, finding the partnerships, finding the STEM programs because we need to, go beyond our sort of usual cast of characters. This is going to take a strong network, and it's going to take continued and sustained partnerships and investments. A lot of these opportunities, whether you're a minority-owned business or a woman-owned business, are going to need a little extra, and that extra should fall across Massachusetts, and this is something Mass CEC is committed to. The other thing I might mention is right now the electric distribution companies, which we call the utilities, and the state are reviewing proposals for 1,600 megawatts. It's the third procurement run by the state. In that procurement, the state placed a new requirement on Jen's team at Vineyard Wind and the Mayflower team to go above and beyond in terms of their focus on diversifying their supply chain, committing to a diverse and equitable workforce, and that was a conscious decision by the state and by the procurement folks. We're going to continue to work with partners, the Office of Supplier Diversity, and all of our partners to continue to do this. We're at the first stages here, and the work has just begun.
Bruce, thank you. And you mentioned in your initial question I asked you about, I think you said 1,500 or 1,600 megawatts, and you mentioned that on another opportunity that's coming, but I don't want to put you on the spot. But when we say 1,600 megawatts, how many households is that the equivalent to?
Oh, that's a great question. Jen, help me out here. Vineyard Wind's going to power what?
Yeah, it'll be about 800,000 households, because Vineyard Wind is about 400,000 households and it's 800 megawatts. So my rough math says it's about 800,000 households on top of the 1,600 that the state, like Bruce said, that the state has already procured through Vineyard One and Mayflower.
Yeah, and I think that's great information, and it helps those of us who may not be in the wind and the details on this, the wind details on a day-to-day basis, but it really shows the impact that this will have and continue to have. But on the issue of diversifying in the supply chain as well as workforce opportunities, anyone else want to jump in there?
I mean, go ahead, Jen. I'll just add quickly, and I think everyone is aware of this, of all the work our community colleges are doing in this. So I just wanted to, mention, like Bristol Community College, Cape Cod Community College, Mass Maritime. Again, they have a very diverse student population. And so I just wanted to plug them and all the good work that they're doing that I'm sure you're aware of, and Bruce and others, as far as helping to diversify the workforce.
I would just add to that as well that we work very well with diverse hiring requirements. We make a major effort to try to go above and beyond when we can. And a lot of our efforts is supported by all the local labor unions that we're affiliated with. They do a great job helping us support that effort. And it takes a lot of extra effort, but that's what it's going to take if we're going to make progress in that vein.
Yeah, and I'll just add too, because I see that there's also an audience question for Vineyard specifically on this. Bruce had mentioned, one of our biggest assets in the state is our workforce, and there's a big emphasis on diversifying the workforce. And we're excited about the proposal we put together into the state for this next solicitation. But even on our first project, with there's no commitment that Vineyard One has made on diversifying the supply chain and workforce, but we do know that as the first project in what will be a very big industry, the responsibility to make sure that we set the right precedent is absolutely there, and we are taking that very seriously. In diversifying the workforce, we've committed to utilizing union labor for the construction of the projects, and we're very proud of the project labor agreement that we signed with the Southeastern Massachusetts Building Trades Council over the summer. That was the culmination of a very long negotiation process that we had with the unions about what construction and union construction in offshore wind actually means. They have, they constructed the 5 turbines off of Block Island, but going as far offshore as we will be and constructing, dozens and dozens of turbines is a different kind of PLA. And so within that PLA, it guarantees about 500 union jobs during construction. And we also have a strong commitment to DEI efforts as part of that PLA. So like Tim was saying, the unions are a key partner for us in helping to diversify the workforce. We know that we will be constructing using union labor. We know we want to cultivate a diverse workforce, and so we'll be partnering with the unions on that. Our diversity targets in Vineyard Wind 1 for construction are to hit 20% Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the construction workforce and 10% women. And for those familiar with construction, those are very progressive goals that we're going to have to work really hard to meet, and we feel confident that we can. We will also be supporting a few programs that the unions run aimed at helping to diversify the workforce. Mainly the Building Pathways program, which is a pre-apprenticeship program that works to recruit diverse populations to understand the opportunities within the trades and get them geared up and ready to qualify for apprenticeships. So that program has proven to be one of the more successful programs that has diversified the union membership in bringing new people in. So that's another thing we're doing. We're also looking at our own workforce and working with our suppliers to ensure that as the global industry sets up here in the US, there's an understanding of the importance of diversifying the workforce and making sure that the opportunities are inclusive. And a lot of the work that CEC has done to identify partners within the state and help fund programs to support the diversification of the workforce have been really critical as well.
Thanks, Jen. There's also an audience question, and I think Tim Harvey from Manafort Precision is an example of work that's been done to date, tangible work as a result of the investments that have been made in the laydown facility in the Port of New Bedford, and there's opportunities that are in the future. But one of the questions is, what is the timeline for business starting, and will this be in the Worcester area or only in the New Bedford area? I think there's opportunities throughout the state, but maybe is there any tangible examples beyond Manafort Precision, or maybe Tim, of others, or anyone maybe where there's economic activity or contracts or work that people have gotten beyond Tim?
I think that what I was speaking to in the very beginning of the discussion is this is a significant technology that's coming to the area, and when you look at the number of households it's going to heat and power, and you look at, I was reading a statistic that said that the Northeast, it's equivalent of 32 nuclear plants. That's not going to get built without the people that are needed, and it's not going to get built without the materials and the vehicles and the equipment and the rigging that we need to purchase and the lumber and all of these different supplies. And there's no way that just one small area is going to be able to support that. It's going to take all of the state and all of the resources that we have to pull this off. And we're going to be relying on relationships we have here, and then we're going to be relying on relationships that are local to where the work is. And we're going to be relying on some of our local workforce, and we're going to be relying on workforce that's local to the project. This is definitely going to be a team effort that's going to have an impact on everybody throughout the state, and that includes the other states that aren't part of Massachusetts. There's a significant amount of power that's being generated, and it's going to take a huge team of people. We're a small piece of it, just being a contractor, but there's going to be suppliers. There's going to be, like you said earlier, accountants, lawyers, etc. And it's really, really exciting to see how much work is coming into this marketplace from our standpoint.
And if I could just jump in real quick here, Tim, on that sort of geographic question, it is a good one. one thing I'll say is that we, Mass CEC and a consultant team that's supporting us are just wrapping up a supply chain assessment. We brought on some help to increase the level, the deep level of understanding, sort of granularity for Mass CEC and our partners. So they were looking at the supply chain taxonomy and then breaking down the capabilities of Massachusetts firms and companies to be able to participate. So the other piece of this was, and for maybe later on, if folks are interested, we also, as part of that, did a survey of Massachusetts businesses and companies, and had some pretty interesting results on that. But when we look at the geographic spread of the businesses who are participating or who could be participating in the offshore wind supply chain, they are spread across the state. Obviously, I think just from a density perspective, from Worcester County east, there's a greater percentage, but they're fairly equitably distributed between Bristol, Worcester, Essex, Norfolk counties. So, that signals to us, as Tim was just saying, that they're, and again, keeping in mind that, we're not just talking about the hardware, that there's lots and lots of scope of both supplies and services, that there's going to be lots of opportunities. One last piece of this I do want to sort of hit on is that the opportunities will gradually increase. As Jen said, right now, essentially, we do not have the capacity in the US for offshore wind. We're not manufacturing any of the towers, blades, nacelles, foundations. There is some high voltage cable manufacturing, but certainly not enough supply to meet the demand. So what you will see over the next several years is the beginning of the localization of the manufacturing sector. That in turn is going to drive significant and sort of intervals of greater and greater and greater localization of the tier 2s, tier 3s, and tier 4s. So the time is right now for companies to start paying more attention. The other thing I guess I'll say, and this might be something we come back to later, is that and something Judy's team certainly can help with is we're inheriting a lot of these global manufacturers, the Vestas, the Siemens, the GEs, as well as the other tier 1s, are really coming from a European and global sort of business culture. And top of mind is health and safety. They have really, 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 really rigorous health and safety protocols. So if you're a company and you don't have a health and safety plan, things like that. There's also going to be certifications. There's going to be sort of just sort of financial capabilities to be able to signal, insurance and bonding and so on and so forth. So, companies are going to want to start to get, their house in order and really making sure that they're going to be able to compete for these contracts as they become more and more available.
I'd also just add quickly in terms of, what's happening now. I mean, we've been doing work mostly on surveys out of New Bedford for a while. So that's been happening. But in terms of construction, we've started at our cable landfall and the substation that'll be interconnecting our power into the grid. And that's in Barnstable, Massachusetts. And we're working with some local contractors there to do that work. And like Bruce said, one of our cables, the onshore cable that will bring the power from the beach to the substation, that's sourced domestically. That's out of North Carolina. And so we're really working, to identify everywhere we can what existing businesses can serve the project's needs. And that's going to be much wider ranging than just the South Coast and the Cape region. We're going to need businesses from all over the US to serve this potentially $100 billion industry into the next several years.
Thanks, Jen. We have an audience question. It says, there seems to be a fair amount of concern from the diversity, equity, and inclusion community that non-union jobs could actually hamper their capability of having access to the jobs. Is there real work with the unions to modify their tendency to still be a, quote, an old boys network, end quote, question?
Bruce, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, Jen, you can speak to that as well. Look, I think some of that I guess perception is based upon sort of years of activity. But what we're seeing at Mass CEC in terms of not only the Mass Building Trades Council and the Southeastern Council, the umbrella organizations that serve on behalf of the locals, we are seeing a really strong and genuine commitment to do better, frankly. And as Jen was talking about, and one of the awards we made, I mentioned that access to opportunity and workforce. Programs like Building Pathways, which is going to reach beyond the typical cohort of sort of union apprentices, and really focus on reaching out into the communities for especially for women and minorities and other priority groups. We're going to need that effort sort of doubling and tripling, and we're going to need other entities like Building Pathways to help us on this journey. But I guess, from where we sit, we see the commitment from the top down on the union side. And as Jen mentioned, there are some targets and benchmarks in the PLA, and there are audits and officers who will hold folks accountable.
Yeah, I mean, Bruce pretty much covered it. It really is going to be a partnership between the industry, the state, and the unions to achieve this goal. I mean, one of the challenges is really just recruitment and finding these individuals. There is a big interest on the union side, on the industry side, to get this right and to diversify. Some of the challenges and just the work that's involved and going offshore for several weeks at a time, and kind of other things that are just the nature of this industry present additional challenges. So we really do need kind of an all hands on deck approach, and I think that we have that. And like Bruce said, we've got the commitment. And I know from working firsthand with the trades, it really is, it's genuine, it's there, and we're all working very hard on addressing it.
Next question is, how do you foresee the impact of Governor Baker's proposal for investment on renewable energy, particularly offshore wind, having on the Massachusetts economy? And how will this position us in comparison to New York, New Jersey, and Virginia?
I guess I'll start with that one. A great announcement last week from the governor at the American Clean Power Offshore Wind Conference. I think this is on par, right in line with the Baker administration, where there is and the legislature a strong commitment. There's now a state law, the climate bill, which essentially says Massachusetts will be net zero by 2050. We have looked into the pathways, and we understand that we are going to need to begin to electrify fairly dramatic our building sector, particularly, and our transportation sector. And that means programs, excuse me, across the board, with utilities, with the private sector, with the trades, in order to start to begin to build this market. And there's a lot of work ahead. So I think the governor rightfully has said, well, we need to invest goals. I want to be clear that that was for across of these focus areas, whether it's buildings, transportation, offshore wind, or our grid, to the extent that those resources do flow to offshore wind, and I know outside of that, the governor has earmarked some of the America Rescue Plan money for offshore wind ports, which is critical. The ports and infrastructure facilities. This is a marine. These components, from the blades on down, are too large to move by any other means other than on the water, and that means ports. It means ports. How's it compare? I mean, look, the Commonwealth is an early mover, and we're a leader. We've made investments in the marine terminal and other facilities. we know that are going to be needed. And we fully intend to compete with our neighbors and to also work with our neighbors. Just last week at the conference I mentioned, Rhode Island and Connecticut, Vineyard Wind and folks from GE to run a supply chain 101 introduction. So, helping folks understand who's doing the buying, what are the opportunities, because it's not just as Jen was saying, it's not just Vineyard Wind, right? GE is going to be doing some buying. She mentioned Deme Offshore, on and on. So I'll just.
Okay, next question. I think we've touched on a little bit, but who is working on increasing public understanding and enthusiasm for offshore wind? Clearly, we're talking a lot about the economic impacts and the supply chains that are activated. But I guess the question maybe is, what can people out there affirmatively do to support and buy into offshore energy?
I feel like I've been doing a lot of talking, but I'll start. Look, I think there's a lot of partners like ABL and the Worcester Chamber, like we're doing just today, across to the folks at the Environmental League of Massachusetts and a campaign that's started on really sort of New England and offshore wind. But yes, I think this falls to lots and lots of different partners to increase the visibility into the need for the need for and the opportunities presented by offshore wind. There is not another sort of cost-efficient source of indigenous renewable energy to get us to address the climate impacts that we need to address without offshore wind. It is going to be a critical part of our energy future, but we have a lot of work to do to get that word out to the people of the Commonwealth. So one of the things we've got on our to-do list is partnerships on campaigns, and I think you'll see more of that as we get into 2022.
I think too. I mean, obviously, I spent a lot of time with advocates of offshore wind, as I know Bruce and the others on this call do as well. So we see it. I think one of the challenges that we've had as an industry is that here in Massachusetts, we've been talking about offshore wind for 20 years. Cape Wind was proposed in 2001, and there was a lot of energy around that on both sides. And we're at a point now where the industry's here. We're doing it. We're under construction. Vineyard Wind is moving full steam ahead. Other projects are lined up right behind us. And I think getting that message across, that this is not still some amorphous thing happening in the future. This is real. This is now. It's finally here, I think, is the big key to get across, especially to the business community that's been sitting around kind of wondering when was the time to invest, when was the time to get engaged. It really is right now, if they're not already, because we're off to the races on contracting, on identifying businesses, and it's really just going up from here.
Yeah, now that's a great point. Having been part of administration, and Jen Benson was part of the legislature that kind of launched some significant investment with the idea that we would try to capture the future or create a new sector of the economy for Massachusetts and the region. Without question, I think the public understanding has grown, but we've got more work to do, especially as we have things come online. Bob Bauer from the AFL-CIO had a question. He said, my question, will some of the large manufacturers like Raytheon and GE be involved in the supply chain? I know Bruce had mentioned GE, but Judy, I don't know if you have any insights or thoughts on how we tangibly can get Massachusetts manufacturers, especially some of the larger ones who will then also buy from some of the smaller manufacturers in this sector.
Yeah, I'm sure that the larger manufacturers will participate. It's very important that the small and mediums participate, and that's Mass MEP's main focus. So obviously connecting with those larger manufacturers and the supply chain that they may have. So yeah, our focus is small and medium, and I think Bruce mentioned a few things as far as, the health and safety policies, certifications, insurance, and these are the type of things that, again, small and medium sized manufacturers will have to be very much educated early, and we need to see if these are barriers to entry. But again, we are very excited about this and and being part of this wind supply chain. And, our tier 2, 3s, and 4s, I'm sure will work with the larger manufacturers as well as, directly with Midwind and others.
Thanks, Judy. Another audience question: what are the continuing needs for private capital to be engaged in this effort? Bruce?
Yeah, yes, and lots. And this is, as Jen mentioned, this is going to be a partnership. Obviously, these are, private enterprises. These guys obviously have a strong mission in terms of their, as energy production corporations or JVs or whatever. And that's great, but obviously it takes some pretty significant financing to achieve a project like Vineyard Wind is doing. I forget the number, Jen, but 2.3 billion or something, I think, and 9 different financiers on that. But that's sort of at the sort of big level. I mean, you should sort of bring this on down to the tier 2s, 3s, and 4s, and this is a great opportunity to sort of plug that survey we did. Let me just pull it up here, because we had a survey last December to January. It was out on the street for about 3 or 4 weeks. It went out to lots. We had 251 unique firms, and we asked them a number of different questions. But we did ask them about the need for significant investment. And really, to our surprise, and I'm just sort of looking here, 80% of the organization who responded said that they were going to be able to make the necessary investments, and they were going to be able to do that in the next, sort of 6 to 12 months. So yes, there is going to be, investment needed, but a lot of these companies feel as though they've got some capital, and once they have better visibility, as Jen said, into the opportunities, they're going to be able to pivot, take their business plans out and start to execute on them.
Great. We also have a question. How do we increase interest in manufacturing and other blue collar jobs by young people to replace an aging workforce to ensure that we can support this burgeoning industry? And manufacturing, obviously, a piece of that, as well as the construction trades. And let me just make a plug. The Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce back in 2015 helped start a statewide organization called the Alliance of Vocational Technical Education, along with the Mass Community Action Network, MAVA, the Mass Association of Vocational School Administrators, with the idea of expanding Chapter 74 programs, which are kind of the gold standards of manufacturing and building trades, et cetera. So we're trying to work with everyone, the legislature, administration, others, to create more Chapter 74 seats and programs, because we know there's waiting lists for vocational technical schools across the state. And we've got legislation pending that would hopefully dedicate increased funding. The legislature and the Baker-Polito administration have made significant investments, but those waiting lists are still there. So anyone else want to jump in on how do we get more people interested in manufacturing and the construction trades?
From our standpoint, we just have to continue to encourage them and train them. We spoke earlier about the safety required on these kinds of projects. You can't take a worker, a young apprentice off the street and put them in this environment without some significant training on our part from a safety perspective to make sure that they're up to the task. So it takes effort on all of our parts to really push that training and the safety culture that we expect when we get out into projects such as this. So we'll certainly be putting that effort in and have been. but it's going to take all of us to do that, to continue to encourage this young workforce. And we've been working with the unions to do that. They've supported us incredibly over the years in that effort, and we look forward to continuing to do that in the future.
Thanks, Tim. Well, we're got some great questions, and we're up against our time limitation of 1 hour. Just any final thoughts as we look to wrap up from our panelists?
I guess I'll start, Tim, and thanks again for the opportunity. Yeah, I think I'll just sort of say, certainly, as Jen Cullen mentioned, make sure you're signed up on the Massachusetts Supply Chain Directory. Be active, reach out, look for resources. Mass Manufacturing Extension Partnership. There are other industry associations that can help. Mass CEC looks forward as we get into 2022. Providing some other opportunities to provide direct support, not only for companies and businesses with a focus on minority and women-owned, but also the support networks. Mass CEC knows, while we're helping to sort of be a point of contact and a liaison, we need a strong network of partners. We need the Mass MEPs, we need the Worcester Chamber, we need ABL, and we need others. So keep an eye on this space, because I think we're going to be all sort of growing together and paying attention to the opportunities and connecting businesses up and competing for contracts.
I just echo that and encourage businesses that are listening today or are interested in getting involved in general to make sure that you've reached out and you're on our list, or we're doing our best to be proactive and source as many Massachusetts companies as possible. But it's helpful for us to know who's interested, who's ready to engage, who wants in on this industry, and making sure that they're on CEC's supply chain database and within our list is very helpful. And thank you for everyone, to ABL and Tim and others for hosting today.
Again, and just to chime on what Bruce and Jennifer said, Mass MEP is here to help and support our manufacturers through this. So please reach out if you have any questions. And again, please sign up for the supply list. But if you have any questions about that or how you can participate, please let us know. And once these RFPs and packages start to come out, we will be reaching out to our manufacturing community. If you're not on the list, if we think you could potentially be a participant. So again, we're here to help, and please be as proactive as you can be.
I just want to thank everybody for letting us participate today, ABL and Tim with the Chamber. We're incredibly excited. We've been following this for some time, and Jennifer said earlier, it's been since 2001 that this has been percolating, and it's finally here. So if you're any of our suppliers or subcontractors that are on this, then please reach out to us. We're looking to be active in this and open to any opportunities that we can help support this local economy and this incredible initiative that's moving forward at an incredibly rapid pace. So thank you very much for having us today. We really appreciate being involved.
Great. Well, thank you to all of our panelists, and I want to thank, on behalf of the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce, Jen Benson and the Alliance for Business Leadership for the opportunity to partner with them on hosting this discussion. And I also want to acknowledge Sean Rourke from the ABL team and Stephanie Silver from the Chamber team for helping with some of the logistics to put this conversation together. So thanks, and we look forward to continued progress in this incredibly important field and opportunity.